Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leading with Agility, the show that uses the world around us to explore how leadership can be inspired by agility. I'm your host, Arif, and as always, I'm joined by my trusted colleague,
TK, the Spring podcast mixer and your favorite co-host.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And we're back again with another episode. So, TK, what are we talking about today?
Well, we had some experiences recently, and we've obviously been training quite a few leaders. And I couldn't help to notice that what has been happening as we're working with a global organization, it's an interesting organization because they are a bit siloed in their native countries, and the program we're helping them with, it's a bit of a cross-cultural thing. So what happens is, we've been talking about diversity, but what about managing a multicultural team, managing across cultures or leading across cultures? That's an interesting topic that we've had quite a bit of experience with.
Well, we've had some, yeah, but I think even personally, we've had experiences, ourselves. So fascinating one. I'm looking forward to getting stuck into this. And maybe for our listeners, what's made you think about this topic today? What's on top of your mind?
What I thought is, obviously, even before 2020, we've been spending a lot of time working with people globally. And but now it's even more pronounced, I think. With globalization, ease of communication, right? Using the tools that most of us are using to communicate when it comes to people being wherever they are. But I think also it got me thinking about things that maybe I've been a part of, because usually what has been happening is when you're working with a team establishes sort of like a cultural anchor. Right? They adapt their culture to a particular country, particular location where there's a company culture that's based for them. But what if, and we've experienced this recently, there is no anchor, because every department, every business unit has a different culture. And how do you work with such a wonderful team as a leader? So that prompted me to maybe suggest this as a topic for the day.
Amazing. Let's get stuck into it. Where should we start our journey today then?
Well, as always, I've done some research,
Yes.
and I was thinking about, what are the dimensions, what are the challenging aspects of working across cultures. And, one thing I wanted to maybe start with is the fact that with cultures, people speak in stereotypes, which can be hurtful. So I wanted to maybe make a bit of an experiment today and try not to mention any countries, try not to mention any regions, because it would obviously lead to stereotypes, but try as we can to focus on the actual qualities and functions or dimensions of cultures. I think this could be quite interesting.
That will be interesting. Yeah, it'll be a bit of a challenge, but let's give it a go.
Let us try, right? Let's see if I have to edit this podcast quite heavily or not. So the first one I wanted to speak about is, the first dimension is the direct versus indirect communication.
Okay. So, tell us what that's all about.
Well, in some cultures, you have a very direct approach to communicating, right? You say it as it is, everything's in the open, everything's quite clear, and everything's really upfront, because, these people in these cultures believe that it's just important to be verbose, it's important to be direct, and I'm sure we all know these peoples or set cultures. But also, there is a second side of the spectrum, which is cultures that are more indirect and communicate more based on context. Sometimes, even like really indirectly, not to say things directly. So there's a spectrum, but you can have people from both sides of the spectrum in a single team. I don't know if you have experience with any of that, Arif.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely worked. I mean, one particular experience of mine stands out, which is many years ago, I was working with an organization or a business that was global. And I was asked to go and help work in their office in France, actually. So that was quite an interesting experience for someone brought up in an English culture to go and work in a French working culture. Completely different. Um, very different style. Firstly, I'm not a French speaker, so that was a bit of a challenge. Although their business language was English, it was quite a challenge. So working in a different country altogether and experiencing a different working culture meant it was hard to. It took time for me, I think, to learn and get to grips with, what this communication patterns were, the communication styles were, how I needed to come across, what I needed to be more careful of. I got a lot of advice, which was good, but it wasn't easy. Oh, I just broke the rule. I've mentioned a country already.
You did, but I will not cut it out. So it's a learning moment, Arif, a learning moment. Let's improve ourselves for the future.
Try.
So what I can tell a story which is actually quite recent. So we've been working with a global organization, and as you're listening to these podcasts, I'm sure you can imagine that I'm quite a direct communicator. I'm on one side of the spectrum, and working with many people from different cultures, I get reminded that it's a good idea to maybe tone it down a bit, and I do. And what was interesting to me is my brother-in-law probably seeing my videos on LinkedIn. I'm not definitely getting any credit there, but he actually started recording videos regarding a webinar. He basically trains marine medical rescue personnel and such, right? Important stuff, obviously.
Fascinating.
I was just so surprised about the directness of his style, right? I was reflecting that I thought I had a very direct style, and what he said, and it's a direct quote. He said that in his video, he said, "Well, you've been asking questions after my webinar about CPR and such, and one question you've asked is, can you hurt a person that you're performing CPR on?" And his answer is, "No, you can't, because the person is already dead." He's saying that with a straight face, and obviously, I can completely understand. It's all factual.
Yeah.
But in many cultures,
that
especially the ones that
cold.
are incredibly
lacking empathy.
Especially thinking about these very difficult things, like people being hurt and dying, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I've actually noticed that the spectrum goes even further.
Yeah. Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's an example of, even though I think I'm direct, people can be even more direct.
Okay,
so that's an interesting one.
That's interesting. Yeah. I don't know if I've had an experience of that level of directness, but I have. Well, I think I've probably experienced the other way around, because as you've highlighted already, your style of being quite direct. I may have the opposite end of the spectrum, where I struggle with being direct sometimes in making a request and so on. So, and instead I'll talk about what I'm thinking and why I'm thinking in a certain way, but I don't form a request, or I'm not very clear on what I want. So that can cause issues or challenges in its own right. And I think I can recall instances of working in teams where, I've seen, I think I'm bad, or I've recognized that in myself, and I've worked in teams where it's almost like you, but the opposite end of the scale.
Mm-hmm.
I've had team members who will effectively not say anything when things are going wrong, and then really, stay quiet. And then it's like only when things go obviously, I did notice, and I saw that, and I was like, okay, well, why didn't you say anything? And there's no real answer, because it's like, oh, I didn't feel comfortable, I didn't feel it was my place, or that kind of thing. And that is something I've seen in particular cultures a bit more than perhaps what I see here at home, if I say it like that.
Okay, well, definitely trying to keep the rule on. But what I wanted to say is, this is actually quite an interesting one, and the next point I wanted to cover, which is all about how do you probe for the appropriate culture of communication, where some of the people in your team actually prefer to communicate indirectly, right? So your question that you've just asked about, the example you gave, you've asked a direct question.
Yeah, that's what I would do.
Because the person wasn't, and it's
and I don't feel ready for it.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, they weren't. So the only thing that comes to mind for me to be honest, because I'm on a certain end of the spectrum, I don't find it easy, but things that are helpful is the change of channel. Using a tool called Clean Language can be helpful. Look it up. Maybe we'll put some notes in the podcast description. Speaking about metaphor, I'm not even saying using art and so on, but maybe speaking about something else, using euphemisms. This is the style that these kind of communicators prefer. Something that people that communicate more directly, or leaders that communicate more directly, if they want to be effective, will need to learn. So there you go, right?
I'm interested in what you said there, TK, about metaphor. We touched on clean language. There's two big things there. We can't leave them unsaid, right? So we need to dig into them a little bit if we can.
Okay.
So clean language, can we expand on that a little bit? What is that, and why would that help a leader unlock some of that communication pattern with team members or employees who maybe have a more indirect pattern of communication?
Putting me on the spot, and no, it's fine. It's just that I don't. It's a complex model, and I might not remember all the details. But essentially, the basis of clean language is making sure you're not putting any of your interpretation or assumptions in the way you communicate.
Correct.
So the question would be like, okay, so what kind of a situation are you in right now? I guess, right? So I might be now commented that it's not necessarily great, but I will talk about metaphor some more, because you can ask about, a status, a challenge, to speak about something else, right? So you could say,
I think what you're trying to get at is the disassociation from what you're feeling right now into using a metaphor to help you describe it. So
you can talk about the weather, for instance, right?
Yeah.
What's the weather in our delivery at the moment? Or, how do we feel if the situation on the factory floor was a fruit? How would you describe it, right? It might be easier for some people to do that because it's a bit indirect, isn't it?
Or they might think you're a bit crazy suggesting
people usually do, but I get used to that. That's the direct style, by the way.
But I take the point, yeah. So, and yeah, if any listener wants to look it up, it is a popular, well-known method of communication. One of the proponents of it, Dave Grove, is someone who came up with or I suppose is a thought leader, or is probably the originator of the method. So do check that out if you're interested. But okay, thanks for that, TK. That's good to know. Good to be able to understand that there are ways to tackle. And I suppose if you're a leader, right, and if you are running a team where you've got this cross-cultural challenge, it really pays to think about alternative communication patterns when what you are used to doing and what you typically do isn't working. You've got to think of other ways of getting your points across or communicating effectively.
There you go. And we'll talk about some strategies later on, but I'm keen to move on to the next challenge, because there's more than just one challenge.
Go for it.
Which is many cultures use their own language. Maybe have a different accent, right?
Yeah.
And what can happen is people don't feel comfortable in speaking in a certain language that we decide to communicate within a team or maybe people have a certain accent that's difficult for other people to tune into. That can raise some problems, can't it?
And not only that, it's like there's this kind of difficulty of, I've not understood what they've said, but how do I politely ask them to repeat what they've said without offending them because I didn't understand it through their accent? I've had that so many times. I mean, one of the things I've started doing now to kind of break that tension, even before it happens, because I now have this kind of, not premonition, but like forewarning that, okay, I'm going to be working with some people who from a totally different culture, background, country, whatever. English probably not their first language. And I always start off with asking them, could you help me with how I should pronounce your name? And I think
that's brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really easy way to like build a bit of connection and trust, and then make them feel that, this person actually it cares about my cultural background or my language and is making an effort. And I think that can really help with bringing the barrier down a little bit. I mean, it's not going to solve everything, but it's a start.
And, the problem that you've mentioned in terms of accents not being able to be understood is obviously a common one. I pride myself on being able to be, I'm quite skilled in tuning into different melodies of different languages. And, I'm usually quite proud when someone says, Tika, can you explain what they said? Even though, I'm, for instance, in a different room and they click mute and say, I haven't understood anything that this particular person said. Tika, can you help me? But I can understand the challenge. And 90% of the time, people will just pretend that they understood. And it can lead to comedic circumstances and, very serious misunderstandings, to say the least. And it's a problem. So, yeah, well, I have to say it's a difficult one to find a polite way of saying, I just don't understand. And to make it about yourself, right? I don't understand because I am yet not skilled enough in being able to tune into your wonderful, beautiful accent. I don't know how to say it the right way. Arif, what's your suggestion?
I mean, that's one. Yeah, you could say, look, I'm really sorry, and I'm struggling to understand what you're saying and I'm not used to maybe working with someone from where your background or your culture. So I'm not familiar with the language. So if you could help me out and maybe try again or write it down, and maybe that might be the other way around it. I don't know if is that any less offensive?
I've seen a cool meme recently that says,
difficult.
I'm speaking, I'm speaking a certain language, not because it's the only language I know, but it's the only language you know. So in this case, we're speaking this language, not because this person with a strange accent wants to speak it. It's because many people just know this single language, which in many cases is English, right? And, I think just reminding ourselves in a team that that's the case, that it's like one of the few languages some people know, be it, many English speakers just know English. It's something that people need to be empathetic about. But I have another one in terms of like making sure all the accents and languages are welcome in a situation. Because, Arif, a personal story, which is also quite recent, and you've also been a bit of a part of it, where we had a person that was on a session with us, to be honest, and we spoke a certain language, and the whole training and the whole program is designed to be centered around, English. And they said that, where she works, it's not a language that's commonly used.
Yeah.
So is it okay if she uses a different language in certain meetings?
Yeah.
And we gave her some good advice, and I think, we did our best. But then what transpired is how difficult she felt, because she was the only one raising it. And it must have felt really difficult for a person to say, maybe I need to speak a different language, right? It's difficult for a person that doesn't feel that in tune with a particular code to, that it might not feel welcome.
No, you're right. It's difficult because if you're right. If you're the only one in the room who's in that situation, or one of very few, you might feel like you stand out a bit, don't you? And
or maybe you're not, but you think you are because you're sensitive.
Of course,
this is the image you put yourself in.
It does. I mean, all this does touch a little bit to our last episode on diversity as well. There's some elements that come from that around maybe it's power dynamics or marginalization, etc., and that can affect how you perceive yourself and how you perceive yourself in front of other people. So,
which we're definitely going to talk about. But this is actually interesting. Language diversity. So I think we should cherish language diversity.
Oh yeah,
right.
Of course,
what does it look like? So make sure we include the other languages the way we speak. So there's not many examples I could give of that, but one that I find particularly interesting, I don't know if you've seen the movie franchise, there's only 2 movies, of Pacific Rim with all the monsters and robots and such.
I have seen it. Yes, I've seen at least one of them, I think. Yeah.
They're quite fun. What I found interesting for people liking these kinds of movies, but there's no hurt. What I liked about that is they included other languages, right? These monsters are called kaiju from Japanese, and the robots are called Jaegers from German. I was like, okay, well, not everything has to be in pure English. You could have some language diversity using words from different languages that are from the constituent members of your team. That could be cool. You could try that.
Yeah, definitely. That's, and I think, from where we're working right now with the organization, you described earlier, they're already doing that. I've seen them, making positive. Well, not say positive. They're leveraging the power of the fact that there is language difference, and we can do different things in our own language without having to get English involved all the time, for instance. So
celebrate this diversity, right? People will really feel welcome if you welcome their languages and accents, and have respectful fun, because this is what makes people feel welcome in this situation. So let's go to the final challenge, the third one, the holy trinity of challenges, which is different attitudes towards hierarchy, authority, and decision making, also known as power distance.
Ah, yes, interesting. Yes. So what is So this is a really go on. You go through this, TK, a little bit, and then I'll add some.
I can see there's a lot that you have to say about it.
There's a lot. It's a big topic.
Yeah, I think this is the, in my personal opinion, this is the most significant one, right? The other ones, they can be difficult, but this one is difficult for many reasons. I believe that having a big power distance, so having a huge reliance on authority and structure, is something that I personally struggle with. Not that I'm a total rebel myself, but I believe that as an agile leader, you promote a team to be self-organizing. And unfortunately, a large power distance, so really relying on hierarchy and authority, is not that helpful for that. So that's a difficult one, right? So again, some cultures really value, the elders, the hierarchy, the position you're in, and so on and so forth. Some others are more egalitarian. Now, but there is more to that. Unfortunately, we need to acknowledge one thing. As difficult as it is, we have to acknowledge the fact that, and we spoke about it a bit last time, but discrimination exists.
Of course,
right? We don't want to mention stuff like, difficult words, but, colonialism casts a long shadow. It might be that it's not only the structure and hierarchy that is causing distance and different attitudes, but even people's ethnicity, their gender, where they come from, all these kinds of things can have a strong bearing on how you're perceived in cultures that have a strong power distance. Just because that you're from a certain country and speak a certain language can both be putting you higher in people's, perception, or lower, and both of them not that great.
Interesting. Okay, I think we should take a break here and then see where we can go when we come back. Are you looking to create a brand new leadership style for your organization? Our flagship Leading with Agility development program is designed with that in mind. Through a structured 3-month program, leaders will discover what it takes to demonstrate agile leadership while receiving dedicated one-to-one leadership coaching. So visit our website today, humble.associates, and get in touch to see how we can help your leaders become agile leaders. Welcome back, everyone. And before the break, we were talking about challenging topics like power distance and hierarchy, weren't we, TK?
Yes.
Let's just stay on that for a little bit longer.
All right.
What is that? How does that fit in with our whole idea of agile leadership, etc., and self-organizing teams? what does that mean for all of that? Where are the challenges, do you think?
It's a huge challenge if you've got a culture that's really focused on a large power distance and, so focused on hierarchy. It's, a question that we get a lot, and some that we really have to work hard on, which is how do you how invite people for agile leadership to agile leadership when they're so focused on that. And, it is a struggle. I would say that it's just to maybe reframe it and help people see others around them as equals.
Yeah.
That's the difficult part there. Arif, what do you probably have a story there? I can sense that there's some things you want to say.
No, I think I can empathize with this a bit more. And I've worked in, for example, maybe earlier on in my career, I've been in situations where, although nominally I have had a position in an organization, I think because perhaps of my own experience or maybe my own perceptions of my own background or whatever, I've always I never felt that I was equal to others. So and I can distinctly remember one organization I was in. It was quite a small one. It was a consultancy, and the leader who I reported to, I always felt like there was a differentiation in how he treated all of us. I was definitely the more junior in terms of experience, but I don't know, there was always something about it where I always felt I didn't have any kind of, I'd say power, but I just didn't have any say in what could or couldn't happen that would affect me directly. That's how a lot of it felt like that. And it was always like this kind of feeling of it had to be earned. And there was never this, it was this inherent or kind of unsaid conversation about what does that mean? Like what is the value? What is the measurement here? At what point will I have earned the position I have already, got and that I'm in? Because it was always like competing with others to get there, and I never knew where I stood. And then there was always this, I don't know if it's inferiority complex per se, but there was something in there for me around, I don't know if I'm valuable enough, I don't think I'm smart enough, I don't think I'm capable enough, these guys are better than me, etc. Maybe it's because of, where I come from. There was all of that in there. It was really difficult. It was never comfortable. Anyway, they made it easy for me because they made me redundant after about a year and a bit. So that was it. And I moved on. But it was a very, very difficult experience sometimes. Very difficult.
I can imagine, right? But the interesting thing is, where is this place for this particular conversation about things like that? Because what happens is cultures that value power distance are also cultures that are on the spectrum of indirect communication.
Yeah.
So, you might feel being, or you might feel being low in this particular structure. And also there is very little space to talk about that.
That's exactly, really good point. Really good point, TK. That's how it literally felt like that. It's like there is no space. There's no one to go to. There's no one to speak to. Maybe you can speak to some peers, but there's nothing they can do either because they're also in that kind of, the power distance is quite large as well, right? And the crazy thing was, I mean, this individual, my manager, he was only like, maybe 2 steps removed, 1 or 2 steps. And it wasn't a big organization as well. So I would see him all the time. I was sat opposite him pretty much. It was really difficult. I remember once, I think I even said like out loud, I don't know if I remember saying this to him or to another colleague. I can't remember. It was like going to the office sometimes felt like I was walking on eggshells. It was really difficult. But yeah.
I can imagine, yeah.
Anyway.
So moving on, there is an interesting model that I have found by some intelligent people. We'll definitely put it in the podcast notes. And it has 4 strategies regarding how you're supposed to deal with that. And the first strategy is actually adaptation, which is acknowledging the cultural gaps openly and working around them. In fact, it's the preferred strategy, but the question is, how can you have this conversation in a culture that's really predominantly focused on non-direct communication. We spoke about metaphors and clean language, but I'm wondering, Arif, if you have any other suggestions we could use.
Oh, that's a good one. It's interesting this because it requires a lot of proactive work, and I suppose it requires managers, leaders to firstly recognize that we are meshing together perhaps one or more cultures, two cultures, three cultures here, mixed team, or two mixed teams working together on a project, whatever it could be, right? So I think there has to be lot of proactive work of getting to know each other and maybe talking about some of those cultural differences up front as part of getting to know each other, whether it's like through some cultural activities or just having open conversation if possible and sharing some of the differences. I think there's something, and then doing something practical around how do we, negotiate some of that. What do we want to do differently as a team? All of that, I think, is what I'm thinking about how you might want to overcome that gap. I don't know, TK, what your research has identified, if I'm on the money or if I got it completely wrong.
You've got it completely correctly.
Oh, okay.
The interesting thing is, and the question we are being asked as consultants is how, right? It's all well and good as to negotiate it, but the challenging thing that happens with cultures that are focused on, for instance, communication distance, people will just like nod. And the direct communicators will just say, but the others will not. And when it comes to the cultures that are focused on the power, not density, distance, what will happen is the person with power will say, and everyone else will not. So be careful of that. We'll talk about different strategies, because the other three are the structural intervention, which is changing the shape of the team, right? So make sure that people that are more compatible with certain styles of culture work together. So you rearrange things. Maybe you want a managerial, then another strategy is a managerial intervention, setting norms early to bring in with higher level managers. So someone with even more authority comes in and arranges things. And, sometimes the strategy, and, I'm reading it and I maybe find it difficult to believe is exit. But, sometimes you have to give up, and you have to, if it's so difficult to establish a productive culture within a team, you have to remove team members that, make it difficult. So as in give up. And sometimes it's just difficult to know where to give up, isn't it, Arif?
Yeah, no, it is difficult. That is a challenging one. I would like to think, we, leaders listening, managers out there would not get to that position where they give up. I think
our listeners are certainly better than that.
Yeah, yes. Well, they are. Of course they are. We've got the best listeners in the world. Of course we do. So there's no question of them giving up on this. I think they would want to find strategies, and maybe the ones we've talked about will help. I'm hoping we can go into some of these in a bit more detail, TK. Can we do that a little bit?
Well, I'd like to go into a bit more detail on a fifth strategy that I think is most applicable for our listeners.
Yes. What's that then?
Because, they're so great that the fifth strategy is for an agile leader. It's not about you as a leader. You need to adapt to an effective communication and collaboration culture of the team. Don't adapt the team to you. Adapt to the team culture. Now, that's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because all the others were talking about, the team members and how you need to intervene, how you need to do changes or make changes, how you may need to exit a team member. I mean, okay, they're all options, of course, but yeah, I think this is what you're going with here is probably the critical thing here. It's about the self-reflection of what do I need to do differently? How do I need to show up? Is that, I'm guessing that's where you're going.
And how can you fit in a team that's there, that has emerged in a certain sense? So, 2 examples.
Okay.
I remember I was working in a company that was very male-dominated, in a very male-dominated industry.
Right.
And I think I told the story in this podcast, but I was thinking about succession planning because I had a plan to exit an organization, honestly. and I wanted to leave the organization in a good shape. So I started to hire people to replace me. And I hired 3 people because my role was expanding and so on. And I thought I'll leave them in a good place. And it just so happens that I hired 3 women. And I ended up having a team
Nice.
that was like, all wonderful women from, 3 different corners of the world. And it dawned on me that like, oh my Lord, I don't know what to do. How would I be able to adapt in terms of communication style to the 3 wonderful women? Because, I'm in a minority here and yet I'm a leader. So that was an interesting situation. I adapted. We're still in touch. We're great friends, despite the fact that, everyone has moved on and it's years and years since that happened. But I think I just thought to myself, well, I definitely am not going to attempt to mold these wonderful people to my style. I'm going to embrace it and, make sure that they find it comfortable because, hey, I'm leaving the organization and I want this team to be effective. So that has worked wonders. But there's another example, Arif.
Okay.
I think a couple of years ago, I had a situation where we were working with a team and there were people from, okay, I will not name countries, but there were people from a certain region that has a very direct communication style. They're famous for that. But there were also people from a different side of the globe which were completely different to them. And a leader was a very direct, a very well-organized and very egalitarian person, a lady. And the other person was very sensitive, but also not that, I think, comfortable in speaking English. And I've seen how this other person was really even close to tears, not being able to express how she feels in a difficult situation. And the other person was just not necessarily sensitive towards that or aware of that happening. And I remember like a very direct coaching intervention I had to do is just call the other person and say, hey, have you seen this other person? Have you seen how she reacts? And I said, then I actually resorted to stereotypes. Like, imagine her where she is and the stereotypical person there. How might she feel when she hears what you've been saying? And she was like, oh. And I could clearly see her eyes widening. And then they were like, she clearly took a lot of action to be able to really be close to this other person and understand her better.
Yeah.
But I said, look, right, you're not seeing it. You need to see it.
Yeah.
And I think this was a big moment, which, I'm highlighting here in the podcast. So
Amazing.
again, not every leader has a coach, humble.associates, contact form. But if you do, this is a job of a coach to remind you that it's not about you as a leader, it's about your team, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's removing those blind spots for you, isn't it? And helping
you
to look beyond. Amazing.
So it's just important as the 5th one, I would call it agile servant leadership.
Yes.
So make sure you help the team establish the culture that's effective for them and adapt to it yourself.
Amazing. Love it. Thank you so much, TK. And a fascinating tour through this whole maze of cultural differences.
Quite amazing, yeah.
Yeah, and how a leader should show up, how a leader should perhaps behave. Let's try and summarize and bring this kind of to a close, today's episode. I mean, from my perspective, going through all of this, it's been quite a trip down memory lane in some respects. As I've already highlighted a few of my experiences, and I didn't go through all of them, but it has led me to recall some times when perhaps the cultural difference was a struggle for me personally, in terms of how it affected me. I recalled at the start of the episode me working in a foreign country. I should have said that, shouldn't I? Me working in a foreign country and having a complete dissonance with the working culture there. But that took me a time to adapt to it, and having a lot of empathy or trying to have empathy, trying to have an understanding of, okay, the cultural language, the body language, for example, even. And in terms of the hierarchy, there was a real hierarchy there. There was clearly things that couldn't be done without the say-so of very senior people. I think there was a lot of directiveness, in that in those relationships, in that working culture. But it just slowed things down. It made things take a long time, and that was frustrating when you're going in there and trying to help an organization turn around and do things differently.
Yeah.
So, anyway, but yeah, bringing it all to I suppose close or a summary point. I think there's a lot to be said from a leadership point of view here, of increasing your self-awareness to understand what do you need to do differently to help bring these cultures together. As you said, TK, to work in an effective style. Otherwise, you're not going to get the value, you're not going to get the productivity you're looking for. So that's the real challenge. And I think that's what that fifth point you're talking about really hits home. So thank you for that, TK.
And I think, as a leader in these circumstances, you just have to have a magnifying glass on hand all the time. Because if you have people from multiple cultures, you need to be very perceptive. Amazing. Not everything is what it seems, especially, if it's new to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much to our listeners for listening. We hope you enjoyed it, our podcast episode today, as always. Please subscribe if you haven't already, or like or rate the podcast. It really helps with the algorithms. And we'll see you around on our next episode. So until then, goodbye.
Goodbye and see you around.